And as I said, you'll find the stuff on YouTube. This happens to be the son in Maine, who's the state senator, youngest in the country. We're fighting the federal government. We're going state by state to get the states to tell the federal government you have to go ahead with thorium again. Because I'm going to show a little later, legislation was put in place in the 70s to sabotage and keep us from pursuing this. I had a 5-minute oral presentation in Maine on April 14th with my outline, and I knew one of the key questions was going to be, if geothermal atmospheric liquefied thorium chemical technology was so darn good, why didn't we use it back then? And so I'm going to draw some of my information from that to give you a background of what's happened. It was an urban legend until this gentleman here, you'll find on the internet, Kirk Sorensen. He's in charge of, if we ever put a colony on the moon or Mars, how would we power it? So he started trying to answer that question. And when he did, he stumbled across this technology. And the working technology had been ordered padlocked and in concealment for almost 30 years at that point. The technology was found in a remote rural mountain community called Oak Ridge, former secret national laboratory. Here's the inventor of the guy who discovered thorium. He's won a Nobel Prize for that and other things he's done. Though it was unsuitable for nuclear weapon production, it could generate an incredible amount of heat, the heat that's heating the interior of the planet. He explained to his assistant that they had made a $50 quadrillion discovery. This is in 1942. Now, if you've made a discovery that's, a quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. If you made a $50 quadrillion discovery, that means your energy is going to have to substitute someone else's. If you make 50 quadrillion, someone else isn't going to make 50 quadrillion. The concept of the thorium chemical reactor first rose in the early 40s, 45. I believe President Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, ordered Robert Oppenheimer to encourage the thorium energy crash program at the secret of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, so as to counter the uranium nuclear weapon of war, which was a stick. He wanted something that be served as a carrot. So once we get people in line, World War II, a lot of it was over energy. He knew some things that were going on, and he thought, man, we have this amazing energy force. We won't have to fight over energy again. Soon after that, he died a few days later, but fortunately, he had ordered the work to begin, and so it did. 6 months after the 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, Los Angeles, 5-term Democratic Congressman Jerry Voorhis, he had a nickname, Kid Atlas. By the national media, he was Ayn Rand's congressman, and they were both local supporters of this thorium technology. As a side note, although Ayn Rand majored in history to advance her writing career, the Jewish-Russian immigrant had strong scientific and mathematical background. Some research cites Ayn Rand as one of the top 20 most intelligent, brilliant women to have ever lived. And there's the link to that. In 1946, Ayn Rand was writing a screenplay, Top Secret, about the atomic bomb. It was based on both her research and her visits to the secret atomic laboratories, interviewing numerous scientists, including at least twice Oppenheimer, military politicians and so forth, that she got direct involvement with the Manhattan Project. So you've got a brilliant author who could understand what was going on. And there's a journal about this that I discovered later. Anyway, let's see. Both recognized that thorium chemical reactors could supply world's safe, clean, inexhaustible, cheap power with no possibility of nuclear weapons development derived from the thorium waste product. Things started happening in 46. Kid Atlas, the brilliant congressman from just north of Los Angeles, a 5-term congressman, there was an attack going on with him. They wanted him out of Congress because he had filed the papers to start the Atomic Energy Commission and the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, and due to his seniority, he would have been the chairman of that group. If that occurred, any plans others had to possibly try and block this stuff in Congress would possibly fail. They needed him out of the way. The gentleman who would eventually defeat him did such a dirty campaign, he got a nickname, Tricky Dick. It was Richard Nixon's first time going for Congress. So in 1946, Ayn Rand's doing the screenplay. I think, well, Oppenheimer realized what was going on, and I contend, and again, it's my theory, that he told her, Hein, you're never going to finish it. You're going to be shutting down all information on atomic energy, and somehow that's going to disappear. So, you know, if you want something for the future, you better make a copy of whatever you do. And they don't have photocopiers back then. You have to rewrite everything over again. Because as it says in the cartoon here, where the cartoon says the right to know, and the newspapers are saying, hey, aren't you kind of spelling that wrong? Isn't there a K and a W at the end of that? We should know. So the government gatekeepers would have the final say on what information gets out to the public. Between 1947 and 2000, how did an announced $50 quadrillion atomic energy eventually fade into an urban legend? Fortunately, Freedom of Information Act, that things typically after 40 or 50 years they start releasing stuff. Here's a case where, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, we found out the good news is the R&D did continue on the thorium chemical reactors. Here's a peek at some of the news. For instance, here's who I contend was John Galt. Alvin Weinberg, he just had his 100th anniversary last April. He died at age 92, by the way. Inventor of all. Dr. Weinberg was the second youngest physicist on the Manhattan Project and became the director of this major facility at the age of like 30, 32. Amazing, brilliant individual. If this gentleman, John Galt, just Holyfield is his nemesis, be it Thompson or one of the real nasty political people. Things were going so well that 1953, the Air Force has already spent $1 billion because they want Galt power to run their strategic Air Force. Once regular fuels get the plane up, they use these atmospheric Galt reactors to keep the plane aloft for months if necessary. So the United States Air Force had invested $1 billion, which is $10 billion in today's dollars. It was successful. They developed a miniature one. You're looking at 150 kW chemical reactor there, which means you have minimization too, which means for small businesses, all sorts of phenomenal opportunities with this technology. And the taxpayers have already dumped $10 billion into this. Now the elites confirm their worst fears that Galt is a greater threat than even they first imagined. They were getting money to do this research, and so that's fine, but unfortunately the research turned out to be bad news for those who didn't want this. By December 1953, Eisenhower formally orders a blank wall between Oppenheimer. They don't want him getting any of these secrets. He's been fighting with the Air Force already. Now that they know it works, damn, we're worried Oppenheimer might tell the public. And so there's books out on all the devious things done to essentially attack this titan on the left. But they did get him out. And then the plans were, well, the Air Force isn't going to need this technology because we got interballistic missiles down, so we don't need the Air Force. So their plans were, okay, we're going to go to the ICBM. Once President Nixon wins the 1960 election, the elites can dispose of Galt before it gets too much more significant. Galt would be just too much of a shock on the world energy infrastructure. It's best to keep it buried. Maybe once we've exhausted all the oil and all those things, then we'll bring this out. That could be centuries from now. Unfortunately, things didn't work out that way. If you remember, Vice President Nixon did not win the election in 1960. Kennedy did. Here's what I contend is John Galt and President Kennedy. And Galt is explaining to Kennedy about this amazing technology. As noted earlier, Kennedy made Weinberg, well, that was another presentation in the early, Weinberg was his scientific advisor, or I'm contending Galt was JFK's advisor. JFK and FDR both have recognized that once major drivers of the last wars was energy, this could end that. Energy wars would end with the Galt chemical reactors. So we have the Atomic Energy Commission. They published an article in 1962 that said there were like 10 or 12 different nuclear technologies being analyzed at that point. And there's only so much funding you can have. So they went to an outside independent agency and said, okay, we've got limited dollars. What ones should we focus on? And they said, the Galt reactor. That had the greatest promise. And again, the citations of where this stuff is now popping up, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. Like FDR and Congressman Voorhees from the 40s, President Kennedy agreed with Dr. Weinberg's assessment that the thorium chemical reactors could now lead the world into atomic thorium age. In fact, an article just released last November of last year, and again, as I'm doing my investigation, I'd like to think I'm brilliant and creative, but I'm an engineer. I'm kind of following facts here. And the facts were, Kennedy even spoke enthusiastically of thorium in a speech as late as October 26, 1963. In that speech, he promised all Americans that by the end of the 20th century, electricity would be produced, and he used the word thorium. And here's the link. Thanks to American exceptionalism, the age of atomic thorium was going to come and carry mankind to the heavens and beyond. Kennedy wanted to be on the moon and have a colony there before the end of the century, and that we would have visited Mars already. If we had cheap, inexpensive energy, that could have happened. Thanks to FDR before his sudden death, April 12, 1945. Thanks again to JFK, suddenly murdered November 23rd, 1963, but unbeknownst to a lot of the enemies, he had put funding aside against the protests of some people in Congress to do phase 2 of the thorium technology, which is the technology you see here. Weinberg learned that President Kennedy, as I said, had set aside funding. Weinberg built a 7,500 kilowatt Galt chemical reactor, 50 times larger than the 53 model. Here's a picture. To the right is a photograph of a celebration when the Galt chemical reactor hit its first 6,000 continuous hours of operation. This is in 1969. Now, if you look up on the internet, what famous things occurred in 69? Well, in July, we had Neil Armstrong step on the moon, and that picture's seen everywhere. So this is pretty cool. Where's the picture of it? Well, what I find is, let's see, the first artificial heart, the ATM invented, the barcode scanner. Nothing about this, because it's still restricted information. It was shut down December 31st, 1969. The funds were robbed from it and put onto some other technology, light water reactor, metal reactors, things that were far more complicated and dangerous. So it got stripped. 1970, Dr. Weinberg and his partner here